Hello, welcome to the MidnightBSD installation video. I'm going to walk you through installing MidnightBSD 0.8.5 release inside of VirtualBox. So as you can see, I've already got VirtualBox open. I'm going to create a new virtual machine. And normally I pick BSD, and then I'll pick one of the free BSD defaults. On Windows, you may only see the 32-bit version. That's fine too. You probably want to increase your RAM usage to at least 1 gig of RAM to run it comfortably. If I'm doing anything with like heavily graphical or compiling or anything like that, I usually up it more. So we'll create a new disk image. I would recommend, if you're going to do any like software development or heavy stuff, that you go at least to 20 gigabytes. For the sake of this video, I'm just going to go to 16. So now I'm going to select the MidnightBSD ISO. There we go. And this is just the 0.8.5 64-bit release ISO. And for this point, I'm just going to go full screen. So in this case, I'm going to pick no. Select your appropriate options. Usually I don't select imports and I fetch the latest version. It's up to you. So we're going to go with the standard partitioning scheme here, which is GPT. Sometimes you'll have to do kind of a legacy setup depending on your BIOS. I know some of the ASUS motherboards in particular are really particular about booting off of GPT. So we'll just let that install. Now if you're curious about hardware compatibility, MidnightBSD is currently roughly equivalent to FreeBSD 9.1 in terms of hardware support. There's several pieces of hardware that it supports since then. There's been some customizations for SSDs and things like that, but that's generally where we're at. Normally for virtual machines, I'll pick no on IP6. Then we select our time zone. This is probably the slowest part of the install because we have to pick US, and it's way down there. Now in terms of settings, normally I'll enable the mouse daemon. If you're using real hardware, I usually recommend turning on NTPD and PowerD as well. For the sake of a virtual machine, it doesn't matter so much. So we can also create a user. So now typically I use MK shell from the Mirror OS project. We'll just put in any old password here. So at this point we should be booting off the hard drive. Now this is optional. If you decide to report to BSD Stats, it's a website that tracks installs. And what this will do is it will download a package for the BSD Stats program from the import repository. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Now the graphical environment setting, if you choose to do this, it attempts to download xorg and a bunch of packages. Sometimes this honestly doesn't work depending on the last package build, so I'll occasionally do it manually. So I'm going to log in as root here. Oops. Didn't use my normal password for this. So you should be able to do like import index and fetch an index. And then you can see that this is the import is the package manager that we have in MidnightBSD. So you can see there that there is an export xorg package. So I should be able to do something like this and install all the packages. Of course, being a live demo, who knows what's going to happen here. Now, I'm on the local network, so this is pretty fast for me, but this might take quite a bit longer for you guys. Now our package cluster doesn't always take into account the difference between build depends, lib depends, and run depends. So a few of these things are actually not necessary for xorg to run, but it still has to install them. It's kind of a sticking point that I really need to work on. You can see that there's quite a few fonts and things that get installed during this. Now while we're waiting, I can kind of switch to another terminal here. On a Mac keyboard, you have to kind of do Function Alt. Not used to that. So, in our rc.conf, you can see some of the configuration options that we chose during the install. So if you have to change them or turn them off, you can do that in here. Don't need two BSD stats and install lines. It's an interesting bug. I have to look into that. There's some other files in this etc directory that might be of interest to people. You can kind of see the host file. We have the configuration for your IPs and so on. Trying to think there's anything else. One thing that's kind of specific to MidnightBSD, you see this FB receipt file here. So this file's blank. What this is this is actually a script that runs the first time you boot up. So when you see that, would you like to install a graphical environment or would you like to install BSD stats questions? Those are actually based on this file. So if you, for some reason, you want to kind of go through that wizard again, you can delete that file and it will rerun at startup. Similarly, if you are installing from a distant location or something, you can actually create that file and it won't run the script at startup. So there's actually a script in here that's called first boot actually. This is actually what checks for that file and does that wizard. So if you're kind of curious about what that is, this also can kind of tweak things with the firewall settings and stuff. So it actually drops the firewall when it installs BSD stats to kind of work around some issues for people. And you can see there are default rules applied for the firewall when you install MidnightBSD, so that's another area where you might need to tweak. If Secure Shell D is enabled, it should open up the port automatically. And we can also look at our network configuration by running ifconfig. So you can kind of see here in the virtual machine that I got an IP address of 10.0.2.15, which is local to VirtualBox. That's not the IP space that I have on my actual network. It's kind of doing transparent NAT in the background. And if we go back to our first window, we're done with that. So I should be able to test xorg. So I'm going to do that now. The root user account uses C shell, so you actually have to do a rehash. Normally, I wouldn't recommend running this as root either. This is just to test it. Yay, we have X windows. So that's cool. So let's shut that back off for a minute. So we should be able to install a some kind of window manager. It's actually called windowmaker in the package repository, but wmaker when you run the command. So that's going to download a bunch more stuff here. You can see all sorts of crazy things like dbus and cups and various other things here. Okay, so windowmaker's installed. Now, I think during the install I forgot to add myself to the wheel group. Yep. So we'll just go ahead and do that. And I will switch to another window here. And that was, in this case, function Alt F3. And I should be able to create an xinit.rc file that will run windowmaker. Wow. Well, that was fun. So sudo also works in MidnightBSD. Okay, so we got windowmaker up. We can also do, actually, I have not tested this in a long time. Let's see if this works. So if everything goes according to plan, we have our login manager for MidnightBSD. So that's fun. And we may want to install some other things. So say that we want to get ports, as I mentioned earlier. Now, built into MidnightBSD, there's a version of Subversion SVN Lite. You can use that to do a checkout. So if you're a regular person and you don't have developer rights, you would use the HTTP version of the Subversion stuff. Like so. That horrible command is only something you have to do the first time. So this will download everything from the server, and then you can just go into the imports directory and run svn up after that to get the latest stuff, or svn lite up in this case. You can also install the full version of Subversion, which is usually what I recommend people do. Like that. While we're waiting for that, I can also install a couple of things, like, say I went to Lynx web browser. That's still checking things out. You can kind of see there's some other things in here though, so we can install, the Linux version of Firefox, something like that. Attempting to install Midori, which is kind of my go-to graphical browser in MidnightBSD right now. Okay, so the imports tree is there. So if we go into imports now, you can go through and manually compile new versions of things that have come out since the packages, or in the case that you have a problem installing something from package. They're all available there. Like for example, I could go in here and get the latest version of Samba that we have in MidnightBSD and build that manually if I wanted to. Things of that nature. Now, if you need to check out the source code to get security patches and things like that, you can do it like this. So remember, I installed the full version of Subversion earlier, so I'm using that this time. So the stable 0.8 branch is the current supported version of MidnightBSD. If I do, oops, oh, forgot a command there. So used to using git at work, gotten rusty. That's still installing. That should kill the current X session. Obviously, I've got something going on with that account, so I'm going to deal with that later. One thing I should warn you about, MidnightBSD is not production ready yet. It's stable, you can use it as a server platform, it's fine for that. There's a lot of like quirky edge cases and things that are just not quite right that it's not ready for everybody to use yet, let's put it that way. It's a small project, we're moving pretty slowly. It's just not there for everybody. So if you're not willing to tinker or mess with things to get them to work, this is probably not for you. We're still building there, or downloading, I should say. Now there's a couple of things built into MidnightBSD, like we already have Perl in the base install. There's a lot of other built-in commands. There's spell check, you can do spell. There's quite a few different things. So you can go through man pages, you can kind of dig through directories, user bin, and so on, and see what commands are available. But there are quite a few things built in. The reason that we have X windows outside of the base system is actually so that we can update it easier. One of the big sticking points I think for users right now is that we don't have a binary update system in place for the base system. So that means you have to compile new versions from source and that sort of thing. The plan is actually to integrate our package manager to do binary updates for the OS as well, and kind of create like two categories. So we have like a regular software category and an OS category that would contain the updates. So that's a long-term plan that we have. I think this kind of is a good, I keep hitting that. This is a pretty good introduction to MidnightBSD for a lot of people. One last thing I want to show you is that people that are kind of new to BSD, if you go to the RCAD Directory, this is actually where a lot of the user installed packages or port startup scripts would be. So people that are used to like systemd or some other craziness, you're actually going to find everything right in here. So, like we did earlier, if we wanted to enable dbus, for example, we could open etcrc.conf and add dbus enable in here. And then we can start dbus, or we could reboot and it would start. So now dbus is running. So there's a lot of stuff like that. There's a couple other utilities that are kind of handy. This doesn't make any sense, in VirtualBox or VMware, but if you're running on a laptop, there's a bat command, which will actually report the battery life remaining. Now, I actually happen to be running this on a laptop, so it's actually picked up the remaining battery life on my Mac within the VM, which is kind of cool. The bat utility doesn't do very much, actually. It just looks at the syscontrol that contains this information, so it's It's something that FreeBSD can also do, but we actually have a little helpful utility for that. Another neat thing we have is CPU Freak, which again doesn't always work. It depends on the type of processor you have, but like in this case it doesn't work, but it'll actually tell you if you have the appropriate things set, what frequency your processor is currently running at. So, if you have power D enabled and your processor is set to kind of slow down or speed up to save energy, you can actually see what it's currently running at. So there's a couple of cute little utilities like that in here that are kind of cool. If you look at man import, it does have a list of the commands that you can run for package management and what they do. So like the clean command, which will kind of do a vacuum on your SQLite database containing all of your indexes and things like that. And it can delete old packages that are no longer in use. There's commands to do stats and see how many things are installed and so on. So you can do import stats and see that. So we've already installed 388 packages, which is pretty amazing. The syntax for a couple commands are different. Installs the same. Update actually installs a package. It doesn't download your index. So like if you're used to FreeBSD package, it's a little bit different where you would do an upgrade to do individual things or the whole thing. And update is kind of like index and import. So if you want to just download a new index, you would do import index to do that. If I want to install an individual thing or update an individual thing, I could do like import update links, for example, and it would download a new package if it was out there. If I do import list updates, it'll actually check and see if there's any updates. Now currently there's not. Or import list will show everything installed. And if you have any issues with import, if you go into var db import, that's the directory where the indexes are stored. So a specific example, in FreeBSD, for example, they tend to use a lot of individual files to store indexes for things. We're all SQLite based here. So you'll see the index DB. That's actually the current index file. So if your index gets corrupted for whatever reason, you can or you want to fetch a new one without using the commands, you can actually delete it and the bzip version, and it will refetch a fresh one from our server. The master DB right there is actually the database that contains all of the packages that you currently have. So if I do like SQLite master DB and schema, you can actually see all of the different tables that you can access to see what packages are installed, what the dependencies are in those packages, and the settings and so on for the package manager. So if I do select star from packages, for instance, it'll go through and show me, Midori and so on. So that's kind of fun. So if you want to kind of play around or do some custom tools with package management, you can actually kind of get in here and get into that. There's also a couple of built-in utilities. If you go to user LibExec, there's a bunch of import like primitive things to do commands. Some of these aren't very interesting, but some of these are actually called by the port stream when it's creating packages. So like import.create or import.delete will actually create a package or delete a package that's currently installed. And you can see the import install is executed to actually install packages. Import.list is like a basic version of that command we ran earlier to see the list of individual things. And some of these have extra flags and commands you can run on them to do special things. The one I think that's the coolest is import.query. That actually allows you to do SQL queries against the import database directly. So you can kind of use that to script things out and do custom manipulations of things. So it's pretty neat. So it looks like everything got done. So looks like Midori is running. So got a graphical browser, and I can, search the web or whatever. Yay. So that's kind of a quick getting started guide. I think I could probably go into a lot more detail in some areas, but I'll save that for another video. So it's been great talking to everybody, and I hope you all have a good time playing around with MidnightBSD. And finally, I'll shut down the virtual machine. All right. That's it. Thanks for watching.